Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Britt, Kanawha, West Hancock Athletics Podcast. Dan Kroll here for episode 46. And tonight I have one of my favorite guys from growing up and from West Hancock, Mr. Dave Padderud. How you doing tonight, Mr. Padderud?
Good. Good to see you, Dan.
Yeah, you too, man. I was been excited for this one for a while. Mr. Padderud, longtime teacher at Britt and West Hancock, driver's ed instructor. He's the reason I stay so safe on the road these days. And he does the scoreboard and the PA for basketball games. He's been doing that for years and years. We'll get into that here in a little bit. Before we get to Mr. Padderud, I want to get to my sponsors. I have 17 of them tonight. So like always, a few extra minutes getting to my advertisers, but they're the reason that so much money is going into the Sanger Legacy Fund. So I want to give them that time and thank them for giving to the Sanger Legacy Fund. Those sponsors are the Britt Car Truck Bike and Tractor Night Cruise, which the first one is going on right now in downtown Britt.
Yep.
Ewing Funeral Home and Monument Company, Daniel's Auto Collision, Nick Schmidt, Sidetrack Lanes, Wilson's Diner, Britt Food Center, Levi Dawn Trucking, Miller and Sons Golf Cars, Britt Vet Clinic, the World with Nate podcast, the Original Saw, the West Hancock Hall of Fame, Mark Scar, Coogee Professional Power Washing, and Jay Hiscox of State Farm Insurance. And I have a new one tonight in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen. Eric Kroll with Ag Performance. I've heard good things about that guy, and he wanted to start.
He sounds familiar. Do you know him?
Yeah, he's okay. I was the youngest child in the family until he showed up about 8 years later. So
you became his mentor, apparently, yes. Right?
If that includes torturing and picking on him all the time, and some not so nice things. Definitely, I was his mentor. Yeah, and like I said, the reason we do these sponsors is to help fund the Sanger Legacy Fund. It's in honor of the late great Coach Bob Sanger and his wife, Mrs. Linda Sanger. Please consider giving at sangerstrong.com. We help fund the Hall of Fame, give out scholarships every year, help any programs that need money, football team, basketball team, track team, you fill in the blank. They need money, we help with that. So it's a good cause to give to, and go to sangerstrong.com. Sports updates. Summer sports are done. Right now it's state baseball, state softball. Neither team made it, but football, cross country, and volleyball practices start in like less than 2 weeks, I think. So that's crazy that that's coming up soon. So no real updates, except for Kane Zuehl, who's just graduated, two-time state football champion. He is practicing right now for the Shrine Bowl on Saturday. So he's one of the select few that got selected to play in the Shrine Bowl. So good luck to Kane on Saturday. I believe that game's at 4, and you can live stream that on Facebook. Way back when segment here, like always, giving these podcasts some more views, giving my sponsors some more advertising. 10 episodes ago in episode 36, I talked to Irvin Gomez, speaking of two-time state champs. 20 episodes ago in episode 26, Irvin was on this one as well. It was the 2021 senior football players shortly after they won the state title. 30 episodes ago in episode 16 was Chuck Buseman, one of your former coworkers. And 40 episodes ago in episode 6, Mark and Jim Timmerman. All right, the West Hancock Hall of Fame is finally here at halftime of the Garner game on August 26th. The first ever members of the West Hancock Hall of Fame will be announced. After the game, there'll be a reception at the Britt Country Club to honor the inductees. Please come to the game and the reception to honor some amazing coaches, athletes, and teams from Britt, Kanawha, and West Hancock. I want to thank outgoing athletic director Steve Lansing and all the committee and the Sanger Legacy Fund for making this happen. And I've mentioned before, they asked me to be the MC for the reception out at the country club. I was pretty honored to accept that invitation.
That's great.
Coogee Professional Power Washing. They're not just another business that's going to overcharge you for a service you can't do yourself. At Coogee Professional Power Washing, they offer affordable rates for a detail-oriented job. Coogee Professional Power Washing will make your house as clean and presentable as it was the day you bought it. On top of that, they also do driveways, which takes away years of dirt and grime. Call Coogee Professional Power Washing today for an appointment at 641-903-1031. That's Brighton Coogee. He's a senior now. Like I said, football starts in a couple weeks, and I just talked to him. They're working their tails off. They won a third state title, so it's pretty fun to hear him talk about their drive right now to win another one. The World with Nate podcast is my next sponsor. Nate Allison is the brother of a friend of ours in Indianola. He has his own podcast called The World with Nate. He hits on a lot of great topics, and his goal is just to help and inspire people through his podcast. Nate's a native Iowan. He loves helping people, especially here in the state of Iowa, reach their dreams. Check out his podcast. Again, that's The World with Nate. It's on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you can get your podcasts. Give him a follow on social media as well. And Dave, speaking of being busy, we were talking off air about how busy we can be. Nate's sister is a good friend of my wife's from our church. And about, I think it was July 10th, she texted my wife and said, "Hey, do you want to go walking with me?" And Julie said, "Sure." And she goes, "How about July 25th from 6 to 7? She literally had to schedule out her walk like 15 days in advance and have a specific time to do it. I'm like, man, people, we just get so busy. It's hard to, it's crazy. But anyway, that was just on my mind when I was reading that. So
Yeah.
And then we have Jim Deemer in the Britt Vet Clinic. The Britt Vet Clinic is also a good long-term sponsor I've had for the podcast. They're located in downtown Britt. They're there for all your small animal vet needs and swine vet services. Call them at 843-3416 or email the Britt Vet Clinic at brittvetclinic@gmail.com. And again, this is tonight, the Britt Car Truck Bike and Tractor Night Cruise. They're sponsoring over 30 episodes of the podcast. Jared Wingert, I'm sure, is already tired at this point of the night. He's been working nonstop to get ready for these great events. The one is tonight. The second one's August 17th and then September 21st. They're all on Wednesday nights, so it's easy to get to them. He's the owner of Mojo Productions. The 5th annual event has free kids activities. Trophies are presented for all categories, and a $1,000 award is given out at each show. You can't beat free admission and great food and drink from Britt vendors only. I know Woody's Hot Dogs is there tonight. I've heard those are amazing. Check out the video on BrittCarCruise.com to find out more about that. All right, here we go. Mr. Padderud, I said you just had to sit there and look pretty for a few minutes. You did a good job. So here we go. I'm excited about this one. You were one of those guys I always looked up to back at church and at school, and you always did an amazing job doing the announcing and working the scoreboard. And so I was excited to get this episode scheduled with you. So how's life treating you?
Well, first of all, it's treating me great. I want to thank you for the invitation. And before I go any further, you'll notice that the name at the bottom of the screen says Kelsey Baker. That, of course, is my daughter. And the reason you see that is because I'm having to use her laptop because mine did not have the capability that we needed for this podcast. So anyway, she's been very helpful to get me ready for that.
Good.
And as far as my background, it's a little bit different. You know, most people that come to either move to Britt or grow up in the area and are fortunate enough to get employment with the Britt and later West Hancock school system are most of the time either from the area or native Iowans. So I'm the exception to that because I grew up near Chicago. In fact, the town I was born and raised in has been in the news recently, and not for a good reason. I grew up in Highland Park, and you probably heard about the tragedy on July 4th involving some fatalities, gunmen and so forth. And I'm not going to go into that because everybody pretty much has heard that, but I will say that 4th of July parade has been going on for years. In fact, when our kids were young and we would go visit my folks during the summer, many times we would go to Highland Park during that 4th of July time in order to see the parade. So I've been involved with that a number of times in the past, and that was quite a shock when I heard about that. That's just not something that normally happens in that area. But Highland Park's about 25 miles north of Chicago, and I was born and raised there. So the thing about living in that area, it's a pretty populated area, and the town's it's considered a suburb of Chicago, and one just kind of runs into another. So when you say you're 25 miles from Chicago, as you drove, you didn't really ever leave. You left one town and immediately went into the next. Yeah. And so you never really saw much countryside. It was mostly just pretty much urban. But the thing I wanted to mention too is I was a third of 4 children. I had 2 older brothers, Eric and Alan, and a younger sister, Linda. And my dad was a certified public accountant who commuted to Chicago every day. For years, he drove. And then later on, he was able to take the commuter train. The station wasn't only like a half mile or so from our house, so that was pretty convenient. And one of the things I always remember, my dad would work pretty long days, and he wouldn't get home till about 6:30 at night. And my mom it was very important for my mom that all 6 of us would have one meal together. So that normally would be supper.
Yep.
So we had to wait for my dad to get home, wash up, and then we would eat about 6:40 or thereabouts. And, we were obviously pretty hungry by then, but it was the one time of the day where the whole family could get together. If we've been in school or whatever, we were all in different grades, we were all doing different things. And it was a time to for all of us to catch up with what we were doing and just to be able to have a conversation. So that was kind of a traditional thing in our family. It was not so much on the weekends, that was a little tougher, but during the week, that was something my mom really stressed because she was a stay-at-home mom and did a great job, taking care of things at home with a growing family and everything. So that always stood out as being a real highlight. And I guess when you grow up, at least in my case, you don't always appreciate things until you get older and realize how fortunate you were. But I was very fortunate. The educational system in Highland Park was very good. The schools were good. The teachers are great. I just had a lot of good experiences, and I will always appreciate that. And we're talking about sports a little bit in this podcast. So I just want to briefly touch on the fact that when you grow up near Chicago, a lot of people, traffic's horrendous. It's not getting any better. Every time I visited after I left home, it seemed like the traffic got worse. So that wasn't much fun. But some of the things I really appreciated was things like museums. And obviously, when you talk about sports, you have 2 Major League Baseball teams. You have a professional football team, a hockey team, and an NBA team. The Bulls didn't really come into existence until about 1966. But all those other teams had been around for long before that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'll always remember about the Bulls and the Blackhawks, so we're talking about basketball and hockey, was they play now in the United Center. I'm sure a lot of people out there have heard of the United Center, but before the United Center was built, there was the old Chicago Stadium, which was actually right across the street from where the United Center is now. And that was if you Google Chicago Stadium sometime, you will see a rich history of a lot of sports over the years. Even had football games played inside that arena at one time. But I was going to tell you a quick story about when I was in high school. And I should back up a step. To get to the Chicago Stadium, that was on the west side of Chicago. That was a pretty rough part of town. So my folks would not even let me go there until I was in high school, and it had to be with somebody, which, you want to go with somebody anyways, but because it was pretty rough. And we took public transportation. We would take elevated trains down to the city, get on a bus. You could drive to the stadium, but parking was horrendous, and you didn't worry about your car and possible vandalism. So we kind of went public transportation. And if you ever heard of the L, mm-hmm. The L stands for elevated trains, which are above ground, but then eventually, when you get downtown, they become a subway. And that was an experience in itself. And so if you've never been on an L or a subway, get to Chicago, check it out sometime. It was quite an experience. But one thing I want to mention about Chicago Stadium, when the Bulls were playing there, that was before Michael Jordan, there was plenty of seats. You could you didn't have to worry about getting a seat. You could go there day of the game, get a ticket, get a seat, no problem, right? The Blackhawks was something different. They had pretty good teams, and every game was sold out. There were no tickets, period. So if you were going to go, either you had to know somebody had a ticket, or the other alternative was to do standing room only. And that's what I did several times with friends. And literally we got there as soon as the gates opened, and they'd open the doors, and we would literally race up, I don't know, X number of flights of stairs to get to the second balcony where there was a railing. And then you just stood there. You wanted to get on the railing because usually it would be 3 and 4 or 5 deep by
Yeah.
the time the game started. That's how popular that sport was. And people wanted to see those games and they didn't have a ticket. So we would race up the stairs, we would get our spot on the railing, and then you would stay there because
Yeah.
if you left, somebody would take your spot.
No,
So
no going to the bathroom. Yeah.
So we really, yeah, you better go to the bathroom before you go up the stairs. And we literally raced up those stairs. And, you know, I couldn't do it now because I'd be out of breath after about one flight. But back then, it was fun. I mean, it was really a rush to be able to run up those stairs, get your spot on the railing, and then for the next 4 hours, you know, wait for the game to start and then actually watch it. Hockey is an amazing sport live. Yeah. So that was a kind of a memory I had. As far as the baseball, Cubs and Sox, I was a Sox fan. Most people on the north side of Chicago, where I grew up, were Cub fans. So I always felt like I was a minority, but that's okay. You know, that's no big deal. But I love to go to Sox games. I love to go to Cub games. It was a lot of fun. And I'll just tell you one quick story about Wrigley Field. You know, today they usually sell it out or it's hard to get a ticket. Back in the 60s, the Cubs were not very good. And a lot of times during the week, or I should say during the season, they had an upper deck and a lower deck. The upper deck would actually be closed during the week because they didn't want to have to clean it all up. And they would never fill the lower deck. So they would only have the lower deck open for like Monday through Friday games. And then the Saturday and Sunday, they would open up the upper deck. Yeah. Simply because there wasn't that much interest because the Cubs weren't that good. Of course, times have changed now and they sell out all the time, but it was a lot different back then.
So you're a Sox fan, but what was your feelings when the Cubs finally won the World Series?
Well, you know, I was semi-happy, but I gotta be honest. The White Sox won it in 2005, so I had that to hang my hat on. But yeah. The thing about Chicago sports, that's the only sport where there's two teams. And basically, the way it works is you can't be for both. I mean, you could be for both teams, but truly, you're either one or the other. Yeah. And quite honestly, Chicago has always been a Cubs town. It'll always will be because I don't know if it's because National League or being on super stations back in the day, like what the Braves were or whatever. But Chicago is a Cubs town, and it'll always be that way. But yeah, you got to pick one or the other, and I just happen to be a White Sox fan.
Yep. So. Yeah, I've heard people that were White Sox fans that were almost furious when the Cubs won it all. I'm like, oh, you got to be somewhat happy for them.
You know, in a sense that, you know, I know there was a lot of diehard Cub fans who had been waiting 108 years. You know, and of course they hadn't been around when they won it the last time. So I think that was pretty safe bet. They hadn't been around. So, you know, in that respect, it was probably good. The city got excited and everything. And so that was good. That was good. So, that's cool. But a lot of good memories on Chicago sports and during that time. Nice. So, yeah.
Yeah. So where'd you go to college?
Went to Illinois State University, and that's in Normal, which is right by Bloomington. Illinois State has played Northern Illinois a number of times. They're part of the Missouri Valley Conference. And I was there for 4 years. I had an education degree. And when I finished college, I had a degree, like I say, to teach, but I just wasn't quite ready. I just felt like I needed an intermediate step. So then I had heard about this program called VISTA, V-I-S-T-A, and it stands for Volunteers in Service to America. Now, VISTA, during that time in the 60s, was part of a program. It was called Action, and Action was made up of VISTA and the Peace Corps. And most people you probably have still heard of the Peace Corps. The main difference is that the Peace Corps was work outside of the U.S.'s borders. It might have been overseas or down in Central America or even in Canada, whereas VISTA was strictly within the United States continental states. So when I applied, they recommended that I did not put a preference as to where I wanted to go, because that way they said they could place you better as far as what maybe your interests were. So I kind of went in not having any idea where I'd be placed. So I graduated in May of '74 from Illinois State. And by a month later, I was on my way to Dallas, Texas for training. And I did training for 10 days. And then I was assigned to Laredo, Texas. Now, if you look at the map, Laredo was right on the Mexican border.
Mhm.
In fact, if you jump on Interstate 35, we all know where that is.
Yep.
And you just keep going south. You go through Missouri, you go through Oklahoma, you go through Texas. That'll take forever to go through Texas. But when you get to the end of the line, that's Laredo. And then you're at the Mexican border. So it'll actually, all roads lead to Laredo. It's I-35. So I was there for 1 year, great experience. And that's really where I got my first taste of special ed, was in that first year of Vista. And I did a lot of work in the special ed area. I also did some work with elderly. But basically our job was to, we were sponsored by an agency, it was called a community action agency, and they sponsored us. And I had several vistas that started when I did, and they were from all over. Some were from New York State, some were from Wisconsin. They were from like all over the place. And we all had something in common. We all decided we wanted to try this for a part of our life, just to see what we could do to make a difference. So I did that for a year. And then I decided, because the climate was a little bit too hot for me, that I wanted to continue a second year, but I wanted to relocate in the Midwest. So I was relocated to Northwest Iowa. And that was the first time I'd ever been in Iowa. And I did that for a second year. And then at that point, I knew I had to start looking for employment, because Vista was not something that you can, you're not going to become a wealthy person. They just would give you enough that you could live off of it. But, your housing was very minimal. It was we used to live in what they call the barrios, and down in Laredo. And the barrios was basically the neighborhoods of the people that we worked for and with, because that way they felt that we could understand their culture better. And that's basically all we could afford to anyways, because we weren't paid a lot, and that's okay. You weren't there to get paid. You were there to get experience and to try to make a difference. So that was a great experience for me. Yeah. I'll never regret. It was frustrating at times. You learn, because when you work for the government, that can be very frustrating. And even back in 1974, it could be very frustrating.
Yep.
A lot of bureaucracy, but what an education it was. I mean, it was great. It really was. So I did that for 2 years. And then I was able to find a job in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And that was the first time I've ever been in South Dakota. So there was a school called Sioux Vocational School. It was kind of a school for the handicapped, but these were not just young handicapped or adults. They were basically adults. So this was anything from ages like, well, I usually started about age 16 or 18 up through, I don't know, 50, 60. Yep. So we had several people that were older than me. And I worked there for 1 year. That's where I met my wife, Renee. She was working there too. And then I decided that I needed to go back to school and get a master's degree. So I did that for 1 year. And then I went to Augustana College, which was in Sioux Falls, and I took graduate classes for 2 summers and 1 full year to get my master's. And during that time, in order to support myself, I worked at Kmart part-time. I was working probably about 20 to 25 hours a week, sometimes 30 hours a week, in addition to going to school. So that was the way I could, subsidize my, living, apartment and so forth. So
for all the younger people watching this, Kmart is like Walmart's like step cousin type of,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any more of those, but
well, they used to be, of course, Mason City had one that is closed, and Algona had one that more recently closed, kind of at their 4 corners there. So, but Kmart during the time, that was a big deal. That was well before Walmart. That was before Target. I mean, Kmart was the place to go, but eventually they just kind of went out of business. So that kind of brings you up to coming to Britt. So that gives you a little bit of a background there.
Yep. So you got hired in Britt in 1978. You replaced a guy named Carol Cousins. I believe he was an assistant football coach for a couple of years.
Okay.
Do you remember the interview at Britt? Who the interview was with? At all?
I do, and I should mention I never met Carol Cousins at all. But when I started in '78, special ed had only been required as a law for 3 years. In 1975, they had a thing called 94-142, Public Law 94-142. I don't know how I still remember the numbers, but I do. But that basically said that every public school in the U.S. had to provide a special ed program of some kind at all levels, not just high school or middle school or elementary, but at all levels. So this was kind of the early stages. So when Carol Cousin came to Britt, he was really on the ground floor of that new law as far as that goes. But as far as my interview, I drove from Sioux Falls to Britt. Of course, never been in Britt before. Found the town. I still remember. I came on Highway 18, and I didn't know you could turn that first exit to go right straight to the high school, because I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
So I went up to the Main Street exit, and I started driving down Main Street, and I couldn't remember every store, but I remember I saw City Hall, and that looked like a pretty nice place, City Hall, municipal building. And then I noticed Casey's on the other side of the street, and I thought, well, I'm not sure where the school is. And there was no GPS at that time, obviously. Yeah. So I just stopped and I said, can you tell me? And they said, yeah. And they told me the directions. And so I went, parked, saw Lila, was a secretary at the high school at the time, Lila Nayland, who later became Lila Grangenet. She directed me down to Ted Runyon's office, and Brenda Hansen was there as his secretary. So I interviewed with Mr. Runyon. And then a little bit later during the interview, Jack Fisher came down, and he had a full beard. And I never knew Jack Fisher before, so I just said, well, he has full beard. Well, I've come to find out later that it was the centennial of Britt that year. 78 was Britt's centennial. And so, as I found out later, a lot of the staff were growing beards that year because of the centennial. There was like a beard contest. So I know Mr. Beach, Mr. Gelberg, Mr. Fisher, and there were several other, I'm not sure Charlie Ashland had one, but there were several of the faculty that had beards. And then I found out later that, I saw them in the fall, they all had shaved their beards off, and I thought, oh, okay, that makes sense now as far as that goes. But the interview went well, and then I got hired. So that was the process there.
I always ask this. I'm always curious, because I'm a teacher as well. Do you remember the details of your contract? Like, what would have a 1-year experienced teacher in Britt, Iowa, what kind of contract would they have signed in 78?
I think that year, if I had just a bachelor's, it would have been $9,500, I believe. And having a master's, it was a little bit higher. It was slightly over 10,000, I think. Jeez. At that time. But I remember, I don't know if it was Mr. Brum, might have been Mr. Brum, and he started like in 1961 or something, if I remember correctly. And I think he told me one time his starting salary was like maybe 3,000 or something. Now, realizing back then, of course, money was, that was a lot more money compared to today, obviously. But yeah. But one other comment I wanted to make about that day I interviewed, they showed me around the building, and I remember Mr. Fisher, we went after we saw some of the classrooms and so forth, went to the teacher's lounge, and before we walked in there, he says, now this is probably the most important room that you'll, if you end up being hired here, this might be the most important room to keep that in mind. So then I walked in, and I remember one person that was in there was Linda Sanger. And the reason I mention that is because all the years I taught, Linda Sanger was hardly ever in the lounge because she was so busy, going 6 ways to Sunday with her schedule. You would never see her in the lounge, but for some reason, she was there that day.
Nice.
So, I don't remember anybody else, but I remember she was there. So good memory there.
You mentioned Ted Runyon. I don't know if I've even told this story, but I got a hold of him 6 months ago, probably.
Okay.
I'm writing this book that I just announced the other day, and I knew back then I was going to write it as well. I'm like, he came up in a lot of articles, and I wanted to see if he would give me some insights. He's in Colorado, I believe.
I believe that's right.
As he's aged, his mind has slipped a little bit, so he wasn't able to tell me a whole lot of things, but he really enjoyed the fact that I brought up Britt, and that spurred on some things. It just wasn't as relevant to what I wanted to talk about, but
Sure,
I just
sure.
love the history of the school, and Jack
Right.
Fisher is actually on my list for a future podcast episode. I just
Sure,
haven't contacted
sure.
him yet. I've heard.
Right, right.
And then you mentioned how you can't believe how you remembered that bill number 92 something, whatever.
Oh, 94, 142. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's public.
So my locker at West Hancock High School was locker 146, and my combo was 284610. And my wife, to this day, anything like that, she goes, if you ever forget my birthday or anniversary or any of our family's birthdays or anything, you're in trouble, because you can remember your
You remember your locker
stupid
combo,
locker combo from high school. And I could literally, obviously the school setup's different, but I could walk right
right?
to that locker and I could have done it if it was still there. So
Isn't that something? Wow.
yeah, crazy. So
And I was just going to mention something about Ted Runyon. When Britt High School in Kanawha, they started a sharing in 1989, and it was a 5-year sharing. Now, at that time, both schools still had their own school boards. And Ted Runyon became the superintendent of both school. I mean, it was a sharing situation, but he was actually the superintendent. So he would spend part of the week in Britt and part of the week in Kanawha. And then he retired the year that after 5 years, they had to make a decision to consolidate, which they did. And that's when, even though they've been called West Hancock starting in '89, that was still considered a temporary situation, as far as sharing. But once they consolidated in 1994, that's when he retired. And that's when we became one district and one school board. So, and that first school board, I think ended up having some members from both Britt and Kanawha, and to this day, the way they have it configured is that there's always going to have to be some from each town, and in different. They have them kind of divided up by quadrants or whatever they do, but you always have representation from both towns on the board. It's just one board.
Who became superintendent after Runyon?
Kevin Brummer.
Okay, it was Bremer. Okay, yep.
Kevin Brummer, and he was here like from 94 to 202, I believe.
Yep, I was freshman or sophomore when he left. I remember.
Okay.
6 a.m. basketball practice one morning. He got really mad at us because we all thought we shouldn't have had school that morning, and he walked through the gym, and I remember, oh yeah, don't ask him about that again. But yeah.
Sure.
So you came in with Sandra Gorowski, Marilyn Menke, Bonnie Pearson, Jean Enyart, Doc Jen, we all know Doc, Terry Barton, Gary Emmert, Brad Mackey, Bruce Huber, and Arlen Nordis, which is, to me, it seems like a pretty big group of new staff coming in at Britt.
Right, it was. And I one thing that's not your fault, because most people don't realize this, but Brad Mackey was actually Bard. It's actually B-A-R-D.
Oh,
and
okay.
that's, and I never even heard of the name Bard before, but that's actually what his name was.
Okay.
He was the he was the instrumental music person for 1 year. He was just here 1 year, but he was here. I wanted to mention a couple of things about that list, and that was a lot. That was 11 people. 9 of those 11 were at the high school. The only 2 at the elementary were Jean Enyart and Bonnie Pearson. Bonnie Pearson, by the way, married Mike Pergandy. You may know that name. Mike Pergandy and Bonnie, to my knowledge, still live in Garner.
Okay.
So, and I think she might have taught in Garner for a while too after she left Britt. But the other thing, Sandy Gorowski and Bruce Huber, 2 of those names you listed, Sandy taught home ec and Bruce taught industrial arts. They ended up getting married.
Oh, okay.
But they actually met that fall when they came to Britt. So, and of course, John Jen. And if you ask Doc Jen, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but the Doc Jen, the name Doc comes from Julius Irving.
Yep.
You ever heard that name?
Oh yeah.
Julius Irving. That's how he used to be introduced when he played. But John Jen, being JJ, he kind of took the idea of, because Dr. J was Julius Irving, and at that time Julius Irving was hot stuff in the NBA. So that's where the Doc actually came from. He came from Dr. J and Julius Irving. Yeah.
Could he dunk like Dr. J? Did you ever see him show off his skills in the gym at Britt at all, Doc?
You mean the real Dr. J or?
No, John Jen. Did he ever
I
dunk?
don't think I saw those.
Yeah.
The first, I should mention too, I got to know Doc Jen pretty well because the first 3 years I taught, my room was actually right in the back of the library.
Okay.
And it was, and at that time, I didn't have any walls separating. Today, they've got the counselor's office there, and there's walls separating that room from the library. But when I started, there were no walls. So it was a little challenging because of noise and just the visual distractions. But eventually, then after 3 years, I went to the room that you remember me at in the main hallway there.
Yep,
So
just off where the lockers are. Yep.
Right. That was Mr. De Leon's room prior to me moving to that room. And then he moved further down the hall. But that was, yeah. So I got to know John pretty well. And of course, he had 4 young children when he started. And of course, now they're all grown and everything. But that's almost seems like yesterday, but it's been a long time. It's been a few years ago. So yeah.
Yep. I talk to Doc every once in a while. Him and I, over the years, have kept in touch. He was one of my favorites. So
sure.
Before I get to my next set of sponsors here, I found this very interesting in my research. In 1984, you and Dave Preem, is that how you say his last name?
Yeah, he was our teacher. Yeah.
You and Dave Preem won a tennis tournament in the city of Britt. In the finals, you beat Bob and a young Kevin Sanger. And then Bob and Linda Sanger won the mixed doubles bracket. Number one, how competitive was Coach Sanger in tennis? Was he like furious that you beat him? Because he didn't like to lose. What was that like?
Well, it's confession time here.
Yeah.
I remember doing some tournaments. It would be in the early 80s. I think, did you mention the year 84?
84, yep.
I honestly, when I see you had written that down, I honestly do not remember.
Yeah.
And I can remember a lot of stuff, as you know, but I cannot remember that that particular contest against Kevin and Bob. I just don't remember that. I knew Bob was a pretty good tennis player, and tennis never really caught on much in Britt. They had those tennis courts out at the Centennial Park, which I think now are no longer. And they had some down by Lions Park, which are no longer, but it never really caught on. But back in the early 80s, there was a gal by the name of Marta Inhouse, I think is how you say her last name. I know she doesn't live in Britain now. I think she lives in North Iowa still, but she used to organize all these tournaments. And the name Dave Wilson, do you know the name Dave Wilson?
Yep.
Okay. Dave Wilson was an unbelievable tennis player. And he, whenever they had a singles tournament, he beat everybody. He was so good. And he didn't like slam the ball 100 miles an hour. He just had such good strategy. Yep. And he would always find the open spots and he put the ball there and you couldn't get it. So when I saw that thing about the tennis, I thought right away of Dave Wilson because, he still lives in Britt.
Yep.
And he was one heck of a tennis player. But I honestly do not remember that. Well, I apologize for not remembering that, but I just don't. But
I'll have to ask Kevin. He's doing the podcast.
Yes, Kevin. He might.
Him and his dad got beat. I could see Kevin being the one that really remembers that. Dad pointing out a few things. You didn't get that one in bounds or whatever. So I'll take the case of that. When I was growing up in the early 2000s in Britt, I don't remember that type of stuff happening. It seemed more of a 70s and 80s thing where there was a lot more of that community involvement.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of cool. And they reported it in the newspaper, which is always small town Iowa at its best right there. So
yeah.
Well, I'm going to get to some sponsors here, and then we're going to talk about driver's ed and then some basketball.
Okay.
Mark Scar is sponsoring the podcast tonight. He wanted to thank Mr. Padderud for all that he did for him in school. They still keep in touch and have become friends over the years. So thanks to Mark Scar for sponsoring the podcast and giving to the Sanger Legacy Fund. The Original Saw Company is a leader in American-made radial arm saws, crosscut power saws, and beam saws. They also offer accessories such as extension tables, measuring and clamping systems, dust shrouds, and miter saw stands. Original Saw's product line includes items for both the hobby woodworker and complex automated industrial settings. Sister company, Williams and Hussey Machine and Tool, manufacture and sell molders and accessories for making custom and stock moldings and trim. Original Saw provides, through Jones Machinery, a preventative maintenance and repair service of wood and metalworking machinery throughout the Midwest. Want to know more about the Original Saw Company? Check them out at originalsaw.com. The J. Hiscock State Farm Team in Britt is a proud supporter of West Hancock and the Sanger Legacy Fund. They can help you with all your insurance needs, including auto, home, life, farm, business, and renters insurance. For a free quote or review, give Jay or Lindsay a call at 843-3563. Thanks to Jay and Lindsay for hopping on board and sponsoring almost every episode I've done. And then Nick Schmidt is a 2000 West Hancock grad, and he just wants to give back to the Sanger Legacy Fund. So thanks to Nick Schmidt for sponsoring a ton of episodes. And then head up to Wilson's Diner at 441 Main Avenue North in Britt for breakfast, lunch, and supper. They're closed on Tuesdays, but open every other day. So check out their Facebook page for which days they are open and what times they're open on those days. Call Wilson's Diner at 843-0550. Wilson's Diner is great food at great prices, and they look forward to serving you. That's Wilson's Diner in Britt. And speaking of Wilson's Diner, I have yet to eat there, and I've heard it's an awesome place to eat. It's always funny, since they're one of my sponsors, I like to share out some of their posts and like their posts on Facebook. And it's always Doug Weiland, Tyler Swenson, and myself are always the first three to like their posts. And I screenshotted like several of them and sent those to those guys. And I'm like, have you ever noticed this pattern? We're always the first three to give a shout out to Wilson's, but I'm going to be in Britt in a few weeks for Hobo Days, and I need to try that out. All right.
I was wondering, Dan, not to interrupt you, but and I want to thank all the sponsors too that you've mentioned tonight. I just want to give a shout out to Mark Scar. First of all, we talked about baseball earlier, and I said I'm a White Sox fan, which I am, but I'm also a Cardinals fan. Yeah. And Mark Scar is a huge Cardinals fan. Always has been. And, he lives and dies the Cardinals. The thing I also want to mention about Mark is that about the time I started doing this basketball scoreboard announcing business, which has been great, was about the time Mark started at KIOW. And Mark is going to be, on September 1st, he's going to be marking his 35th year, that he started. He started in 1987 at KIOW. And I try to hear him every morning. My clock radio goes off at 5:50, just in time to get ready to hear the national news at 6. And then the morning stretch with Mark and John comes on after that. And then Mark always does sports at 6:15. And then the state news at 6:30. So I get about a half hour that I really look forward to every morning. Nice. And he just does a really, really great job. And so I hope he does it for another 35 years.
Yeah. 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 KOW has been a great channel.
Yeah.
Especially with the live streaming they do now for the athletics and stuff. Oh, yeah. Great. So let's talk some driver's ed here quick.
Okay.
How long were you the driver's ed teacher at Britt and West Hancock?
I was there. I taught driver's ed for 21 years. And there was I did it for a period of time, and then there was a little bit of a gap for about 4 years. And part of that was I went back and I took some graduate classes, and some other things would kind of interfere with my schedule. So I took about 4 years off, and then I went back and then did it for another several years, but 21 years total. And I tell you, it was a great experience. Driver's ed is something that, you may have heard the story about the teacher in the accident happened by Janesville. Just happened 2 days ago. I don't know if you heard that or not.
I saw a headline. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very sad. It was a instructor lost his life in an accident involving a student was driving, and unfortunately went off the road and overcorrected, and a fatal accident happened. And unfortunately, the instructor was killed. But thing is that could happen at any time to anybody. Anytime you go into a car, there's always a risk, whether it's a driver's ed car, whether it's your own car. They say that flying a plane is safer than driving a car, and that's true. Yep. It really is. So I guess with driver's ed, I guess my objective was just to try to give the driver confidence. that's easier said than done, because when some kids go behind the wheel, especially with an instructor in the car, you know, some are going to be relaxed. They've had a lot of practice in the past. They're not going to get too worried. They're going to be able to focus pretty good. And for others, they're naturally nervous, which would be to be expected, especially if there's somebody sitting next to you that has a pencil in their hand and they're making notes, or you know, a checklist or whatever the case might be. But I guess the thing I tried to do was to try to point out things that we see in the environment of driving. And I think it was really important for the passengers to notice that too, because, you know, you could sometimes a situation where another driver, another person on the road make a mistake and we caught it, you know, it could be a good teaching moment. So I tried to do that whenever possible. It was a lot easier in town because we weren't going as fast on the highway, unless somebody starts to like go over the center line or something. You know, it was just pretty status quo, but, you know, it forced me to really be alert at all times. And the part I had to kind of get used to was, you know, I can't take my eyes off the road very long, but if I got to make a note, I got to find a time that it's going to work to write something, but get my eyes back on the road as soon as I can, because, you know, you're still talking about a young driver. But I think that looking out for the mistakes of others, watching out for the other guy, being a defensive driver, you know, those are all really important things. And like I told students, I said, you know, the last day of driver's ed, you've all accomplished, you know, the classroom objectives. Now the rest is up to you. You know, you can go, I mean, you're going to be, once you get your license, you're going to be by yourself. There's not going to be somebody sitting with you. You know, you have to choose whether you're going to stay within the guidelines of the laws, use those good habits like putting on your seatbelt, checking your mirrors, all those types of things that we've covered. You know how to do them. Now you have to apply. It's your decision. And for some people, they're going to do great at that. Others are going to maybe push the envelope, maybe go a little too fast sometimes. And hey, you know, I understand people are going to get speeding tickets, but it's one thing to get a speeding ticket, but it's something else to create a hazardous situation. And so that was kind of my objective, is to just try to make it as safe as possible, but also to try to educate and point out, you know, because really, as you probably remember, Dan, driving mostly is mental. It's 90% decision making. It's only 10%, you know, physical, with the braking, steering, or a combination of the two. The rest is identify, predict, decide. You remember the IPTI process? I don't know if you remember that or not.
Sounds familiar. And I was trying to think who my driving partners were, and I cannot remember who they were.
Justin Johnson, would he have been one of them?
Maybe.
Was he in your class? I was thinking that the other day. I was trying to think who your partners were. And I was thinking Justin Johnson might have been one of them, but I'm not sure if he was in your class or not.
If you let us pick our groups, more than likely he would have been.
Like
Chad Eisman or Ryan Zato, some of those guys. But I could not recall off the top of my head. I was trying to picture. I could picture you and me in the car and Mr. Sleeve, and but I could not remember who was in the back. And it's been 20 years now, so it's hard to
time goes fast.
But I do remember being nervous. But in a good way. Like I felt like I wanted to do everything right and not make any mistakes. And and then when you would have us, I don't remember if it was a gravel road or not, but it was kind of out of town. You would yell deer at any time, and you would have to react.
It wasn't the gravel. It was a second drive. First drive, we just drove around Britt. Second drive, we went out in the country, did the gravel, and then I would yell deer, and you'd try to hit the brakes real quick. And I tried to do it before you got too much speed. Although I don't know if you remember, but we always kept it at 35 or less. And that was really on good, you know, not a lot of loose gravel, but we never went more than 35 just because of the fact that, you know, it'd be easy to lose control. I got to tell one story though. And I'm trying to remember the three people in the car. Josh Cook was one. I can't remember the other two. But anyways, we're doing that lesson with the deer. Gravel road driving. For some reason, the driver was going a little faster than I thought, and when I yelled deer, we she hit the brakes, but we were kind of, the gravel was a little bit looser than I thought. And we just kind of, we slid, but we just kind of slowly slid right into the ditch. And nothing major. We were going very slow by the time we went down. We couldn't stop. We were gonna slide. But fortunately, we could just drive right out of the ditch. So the first thing I did after the lesson was over, I told the driver, I said, hey, word's going to probably get out that you drove in the ditch. I don't want you to worry about it. You did nothing wrong. And of course, the next day, everybody was teasing her because they found out that she did. But I first went to Mr. Brummer. I think it was Mr. Well, no, I can't remember. It was Mr. Brummer, but I think it might have been. And I just told him what happened because in case you got a phone call from a parent, I want you to know what happened. And then I called every single parent of each of those 3 kids. I called the house. I wanted them to hear it from me. I said it was my fault because we were going faster than we should have been. I didn't realize that we were going to slide as far as we did. So anyways, I covered myself that way.
Oh yeah.
I thought I better communicate that right away so you don't hear some crazy story about, but whatever. But that was the only time we ever had any kind of problems with that sudden stops. But yeah, you remember that. That was the second drive we did.
Yeah, because I think you warned us it was going to happen.
Right.
And so that's all you're thinking about. It's like, don't think about a
When's
pink
he gonna do
elephant.
it?
You're
When's he
gonna
gonna
think about a pink elephant. Yeah.
But those are some good times. I never really felt nervous in the car, but some drivers, especially ones who didn't have a lot of experience, I was a little bit more on guard because of the fact they didn't have a lot of practice, they just were more likely to make mistakes. And I remember there was sisters that took, I won't say their names because I don't want to, but I had a pair of sisters that took it at the same time. And they told me up front that they didn't have much practice. Their dad just didn't take them out much. And their mom was too nervous to take them out. So, they struggled, but they just needed time. And I told them, I said, you're going to be okay. You just need to practice as much as you can. Try to convince your dad or whoever just to, take you out whenever you can, because, you can, with 6 hours of driving, which is what the requirements were, you can't get everything in 6 hours. You try to hit the highlights, but it was the other times, with parents and whatever that made the difference. So I think that, I guess my one tip would be for you parents out there who have kids who are about to turn that age of 14 and get their permit and want to go out driving, I really encourage you to practice as much as you can, because that's going to really give them the confidence they need to do a good job. So
the first ever time my dad took me to practice, we had a little red Ford Tempo, and we lived at that old Reformed church, the Reformed church, and then the other church, and then the Catholic church. It was parked facing the Reformed church on that side part. It wasn't like the front doors was on the side, and behind it was that other church. I don't remember what church it was. And
congregational church.
There's a fire hydrant right there. And I never knew that you only used 1 foot for the accelerator and the brake, and I put 1 foot on the accelerator, 1 foot on the brake, and he'd had me put it in reverse, and that thing just took off, and I was pressing the wrong thing, and we were about a foot away from smoking the fire hydrant. I think my dad was like, all right, I think that's good for today. It was kind of our lesson. So we'll try this again some other day. So so going back to your teaching career real quick here.
Okay.
You retired in 2010, so that's what, 12 years ago now. 32 years in the district. You described yourself as old school. You had one of the last chalkboards in the high school, still at 2010.
I should tell you, right after I retired, I moved out of my room in early June, and I think about a week or two later, I had to go back to check on something, and I just peeked in my room, and by that time, here's this whiteboard that was covering the chalkboards.
And was Mark Sanger your replacement, or was there someone after him?
No, it was Mark. Yeah, it was Mark. And it's a funny thing. I should tell you a quick story about when, and this was before I decided to retire, but that year, that was 2009-10 was the year, my last full year. And Mark was in the building a lot that year because he was subbing. I mean, he was the #1 sub, and he'd be subbing for PE, he'd be subbing for this, he'd be subbing for that. So I saw him all the time. And so one day I just happened to, and this, like I said, I had any plan to retire when I asked him this question, but I said, because he had his degree in kinesiology or something like that. And I said, you ever thought about teaching, like special ed or anything like that? Oh, no, not really. I hadn't really thought too much about that, and whatever. But, once my position opened up, I think that kind of changed. And then he was able to get a temporary, he had to take some classes and credits and so forth.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think he did that over a period of, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years, and he had kind of like a temporary thing toward the special eds, because that really wasn't on his radar. At least to my knowledge, it wasn't on his radar at that time. He was more into the science and that kind of area. But Mark, by the way, I don't know if you knew that, Mark was valedictorian. He was in my daughter's class of 2001. Mark was, and I had some really good students. Mm-hmm. And Mark was right at the top of his class. So he was a really good student. All those Sanger boys were good students. That's the thing. We sometimes forget that, they weren't just good athletes, and they all were. They were great athletes, but they were really good students.
Yeah.
Kevin, I know, was valedictorian in his class. So, I mean, they were all those boys were good students.
And it's funny you mentioned Mark subbing back in that time period, because that's when I was done with college and I was subbing. And okay. I actually subbed at West Hancock. I did mostly the middle school, but then I had a couple days.
I think I did see you.
2 or 3 days I subbed at the high school. I can't remember off the top of my head who I subbed for, but I did, Mark would be in the building, I'd be in the building, and some of my old teachers and stuff, and it was kind of crazy. I'm pretty sure I went to my locker and opened it up with 28, 46, 10 while I was in there.
Right away. Julie, did you hear that?
Yeah, had to go check that out. So,
yeah.
All right, we're going to get to some sports here in a sec, but I got to get to a few more sponsors. Daniels Auto Collision in Charles City. Owner Jason Daniels is a 1990 West Hancock grad. Whether you need a minor fix-up or complete collision repair, Daniels Auto Collision is North Iowa's premier auto body shop and will have your vehicle back on the road looking better than new. With over 30 years experience and all major insurances accepted, why take your chances with anyone other than Daniels Auto Collision? Call them at 641-220-3805. Email them at danielsautocollision@gmail.com or check them out at danielsautocollision.com. The Britt Food Center is your locally owned, family-operated hometown grocery store in Britt. They offer fresh produce, fresh cut meats, fresh bakery, and homemade deli items. They are working hard to meet the needs and requests of their community. The Britt Food Center is a proud supporter of West Hancock. They're open 7 days a week from 8 to 8, except on Sunday when they're open 8 to 6. Check them out at brittfoodcenter.com or follow them on Facebook for deals and specials. Call them at 843-4429. That's the Britt Food Center. Then Miller & Son Golf Cars, his family-owned operation with over 50 years of business experience. Skip and Jim Miller worked together with their dad Monty until his passing in 1996. Associated with EasyGo, Miller & Sons now calls on over 1,000 golf cars in 3 different states. Companies and courses are always extremely happy with their products, service, and honesty. This has resulted in double-digit growth each passing year. Based in Britt, Miller & Sons employs 18 full-time employees and 3 part-timers. The next generation is being trained as we speak to ensure long-term stability. For more information, contact them at 843-4132. Email them at customerservice@millergolfcars.com or visit them online at millergolfcars.com. That's Miller & Sons Golf Cars. And then Sidetrack Lanes in Britt is sponsoring the podcast. Sidetrack Lanes opened in Britt in 1996 under new ownership. Go bowl at 411 Main Avenue North. Enjoy some food and a drink or two while you're bowling. Join a league and check out their events on their Facebook page. Call Sidetrack Lanes at 843-4567 or check out their Facebook page. That's Ron Bauer and Sidetrack Lanes. Then we have Michael and Brianne Ewing of Ewing Funeral Home and Monument Company with locations in Britt, Kanawha, Clarion, Belmont, and Dow's. Mike is a 1998 graduate of West Hancock, and his family has been privileged to care for the communities of Britt and Kanawha since 1977. You can find them at ewingfh.com or on Facebook. Give them a call at 3839 or 762-3211. That's Ewing Funeral Home and Monument Company. And then Levi Dawn Trucking. Thanks to Levi Dawn and his trucking company for sponsoring all these episodes. Call Levi at 641-860-0077 or look him up on Facebook. That's Levi Dawn Trucking and Britt. All right, Dave, when did you start doing the PA announcing for the basketball team and running the scoreboard?
Dan, can I just back up for 1 second?
Yeah.
Okay, we were talking about teaching at school.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, without taking a lot of time, I was very privileged to have so many good colleagues in the building. You know, when I started in 78, even though we had a lot of new people come in at that time, we had some really distinguished educators who had been here, even at that time, several years.
Yeah.
You know, everybody from Denny Brum to Bob Grangenet to Dave Beach to Will Friesman to Roger Chelberg, Jim Timmerman. I mean, we just had a lot of veteran teachers, and that really, I really appreciated that, because, you know, as a young teacher, I was still really learning a lot of stuff. And I just felt a lot of support from that staff. And then even from that point on, we just had a lot of good educators, good teachers in our building and in our district. So I really have appreciated them over the years. So.
And besides the fact that 10 people came in the year you came in, there wasn't a ton of turnover, honestly.
No, actually, a lot of the people, once they were here, they stayed. You know, that was a very unusual year. I don't think we ever had that many replacements again, that many from that point on. It was usually much fewer than that. But
yep.
I want to tell you one more quick thing about Mr. Perkins.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he was and you knew Mr. Perkins.
Oh, yeah.
You know, in school. But his first real time in the high school was back in 1983. And what it was at that time, my wife had just delivered my daughter, Kelsey. She was born in 1983. And so at that time, Renee was teaching part of the day. She was special ed also. She was teaching part of the day at the elementary in the mornings, and then she'd come in to the high school in the afternoons. Well, when she was on maternity leave, they needed somebody to take her spot. And so that was Gene Perkins. And that was the first time I knew of Gene Perkins. I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but I think at that time he was living maybe in Lake Mills, but I could be wrong about that. I know he wasn't living in Britt at that time. I want to say Lake Mills, but I could be wrong. But anyways, he was a long-term substitute for Renee during that maternity leave. And then by the fall, he was a full-time, he was hired as a social studies teacher. And then from that point on, he started doing the coaching too. And, you know, the rest is kind of history, especially with the football. Yeah. Because he and Bob Sanger are kind of a great coaching for a lot of years. So
they did all right.
Yeah.
One more teacher I want to bring up to you at this point, Diane Troutman.
Yes.
The book I just announced that I'm writing currently, I need an editor. And I was like, I automatically knew who my editor should be. And that was Miss T. And she agreed to edit it for me, and she's begun doing that in the last couple of weeks. And so every night I'll go into my book document and look at the comments and the corrections and suggestions she's made, and she has a gift. Holy cow. She knows her English, she knows her writing, and it's been a godsend for me for this project. So T has been awesome as well. So PA announcing Scoreboard. When did you get that started?
Okay, I started it was the 1987-88 school year. Okay. So it's about 35 years. I can't believe it's been that long, but at that time we were at Britt High School, and it's kind of funny. I did that announcing for 2 years. I would say, "Welcome, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Britt High School." And then in 1989-90, we were now West Hancock during that sharing. Yep. So I remember at least twice at the beginning of the year, I had to catch myself. I started to say Britt, and then I had to quickly say, "Oh no, West Hancock High School." And so that was a little bit of an adjustment. But I started in '87, and at that time, I have made a few notes here. The scoreboard, everything was much different than it is today. We didn't have all the technology.
Yeah.
So the scoreboard was much simpler. It doesn't have all the, fouls and points and all that kind of stuff that you have now.
Yep, individual stuff. Yeah.
Controls were different. I can remember with fouls, we had, I basically did the time, the clock. I might have done the points, but I didn't do the fouls. We had a person do the fouls, and believe it or not, you didn't just push a button for the foul to go up. You had to, it was like a rotary dial. And you would dial, like if the foul was on 32, you dial a 3, and then you dial a 2 on this rotary dial, and then the 32 would appear.
Why'd you have to pick 32? Because I fouled so much, or?
Was that your number?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. How about that?
I'm pretty sure I led the conference in foul that year. So yeah.
But I mean, that was, so that was pretty old fashioned. And of course, over time, things have gotten, the technology, the scoreboards are different, and everything has just changed so much. But those are still some good times. Even the gym, I saw an old clip that I think it was Nate Scher put on when he was in school, and then you see the little WH in the middle of the court.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's this great big eagle thing, and then the walls were pretty bare at that time. There was a few things, but not much. Now you've got all these banners hanging, and there's a thing for Coach Hudson, for Coach De Leon. I mean, it's just really, over time, it's just really changed a lot. So it's been pretty cool.
I miss those bleachers. They had to add more duct tape to every year until they finally replaced them.
And those bleachers, I tell you, those were hard that the custodians, when they had to push those in, that was a lot of work.
Yeah.
So when they got the new ones, you just push a button and it just opens. It's like, wow, that was a big change. But those bleachers were heavy.
Yeah.
And then you get paper caught in there, and stuff would pop would go down, and it was a real mess. So I think they were kind of glad when they got the new ones. So yeah.
Growing up, we'd go to all the games, but we'd find ourselves underneath the bleachers most of the night, just messing around. And I can still smell that gym growing up and how hot it could get in there.
Oh wow. It was very hot.
Just the sounds and everything, just still, those are some memories I still have of that gym. And played in that gym as well, but as a kid, like during the 94 to 99 era or whatever, man, we never missed a game, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Always in that.
A lot of good memories. A lot of good memories. Yeah.
How many games did you miss over those 35 years? Or were you pretty much at every home game except a couple here and there?
I didn't miss, I can't tell you a number, Dan. I didn't miss too many. Now, I will say in the last 5-6 years, because having grandchildren in Waverly, there was a few times, usually if there was a Saturday game, I may have missed that because maybe we had something going on in Waverly or something, but I didn't miss too many. I think this year is probably the most I've ever missed in 1 year, because I suffered a knee injury at the end of January, and I fell on the ice and tore a tendon in my knee, so I was laid up for a while, and I couldn't do the game. So I probably missed about 5-6 games at the end of this last season, but that's probably the most I've ever missed in 1 year. But I would say didn't miss too many in those years. I can't give you a number, but not too many. So I always look forward to it. I enjoyed it so much, and I had the best seat in the house. You're close to the action, you're close to the benches. You hear a lot what's going on. Sometimes good things from the coaches, and sometimes not so good things from the coaches. But one of the things that is always a challenge, and I have to remember, is that you got to be so focused when you're, especially with the clock, because that's critical. If the score is off, that can be fixed pretty easily, because the score people like Miss T and whatever who do the book, they can correct. And there's been times I've had the score off a little bit. That's not too big a deal, but the clock is critical in a game like basketball. So I got to be so focused, and it's so easy to get distracted because, maybe if some fans behind us are being obnoxious or whatever, and you feel like turning around and want to say something, but you can't. because number one, they're just gonna keep doing it anyways.
Yeah.
Number two is I can't afford to be away from what I need to be doing. And so that's a challenge. And I got to be very honest. I've goofed in the time I've done it. There's been times when I stopped the clock and I shouldn't have stopped it. There's been times when I didn't start it when I should have started it. You know, sometimes you get caught up in the game and you forget that, well, yeah, you got to do this part too. So,
well, you're not the only one.
But I am not flawless. I have made mistakes. And I'm the first to admit it. I have made mistakes during that time, but hopefully not too many.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because in my research right now for the book, I'm doing the wrestling section, and during a big meet in Britt, the guy who always did the timer and stuff, this is back in the 50s, there was a match where he was so absorbed in what was going on, he forgot to hit the button to start the third period. And the Brit wrestler won the match with 2 seconds to go. And the fans on the other side were like, well, he didn't start it for 20 seconds. And the Brit fans were like, no, it was less than 2 seconds. So, of course, you know, it was dependent on what colored shirt you were wearing that night. But, it's pretty easy to get absorbed, especially in a close game or a game with high stakes. And definitely. If you had to pick, this is not in our notes, your all-time favorite player, who would it be, and why did you pick Dan Kroll as your favorite player of all time? Just kidding. We won't get into favorite players.
I will tell you that, and you know, when I announce names, it's really nice when there's 2 syllables, either in the first name or the last name, because then you can, it's easier to emphasize. So, you know, if I would have just said Dan Kroll, that'd been okay. But when I could say Danny Kroll, you know, then you got a little bit more to it. So, you know, obviously, how are you ever going to forget that? You know, I mean, that's just, you know, it just stands out. And then, you know, Eric Kroll, now that I can announce him as a assistant coach in North Iowa, you know, and then I can relive those great. Great.
Yeah, you did that at my request. Was that last year or a couple years ago?
Yeah, it was last year.
He's honorary Brit. You better do it, you know. And I was watching the live stream. And he did. That was great. He texted me that night and he goes, "You talked to Mr. Padderud, didn't you?" Yep.
Well, it's funny. After I did that, shortly after I did that, he was sitting on the end of the bench, so it was pretty close to me, and I said, Eric, just so you know, I did that for your benefit. And he kind of smiled and said, yeah, I know. Yep.
And he knew I had something to do with that. It's a shocker there, but you mentioned some like obnoxious fans or coaches maybe say some. What are some of the things you remember? Like fans getting ejected, coaches, fill in the blank. What do you remember? Some of your memories from?
Well, I got a few notes here, but there was, you know, one of the toughest jobs that a lot of people don't realize is, you know, when you deal with fan behavior and whatever, is the athletic director of the host school has a very big responsibility. And, you know, I got my list of, to my knowledge, we have had, these folks have been athletic directors since I've started. Jim Timmerman, who taught me everything I know about my job, the thing, he was fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Chuck Buseman, Brian Peterson, Troy Hopshide, and Steve Lansing. Those 5 are the ADs that since I started doing this. And I know Steve's going to be leaving, so we'll have a new person next winter. But whenever there was a problem with fans, and sometimes the ref would have to stop and actually talk to the fans and or speak to the athletic director. And there has been times, I'm not going to name any names, but it wasn't just the visitors side. It was sometimes believe it or not, the West Hancock side too.
I can already think of a few people.
Actually had to either be, there was a couple of times that we had fans had to be ejected, even on the West Hancock side. Sometimes the athletic director had the dubious honor of having to do that. Other times it was the ref. And, you know, you hate to see that because, you know, basically we're talking about kids playing a game, you know. We're here to have fun. Yeah, of course you want to win the game. We all are competitive. I'm competitive as much as the next guy, but we're still talking about high school kids. We're not talking about professional athletes. These people are not making, millions of dollars and all this kind of thing. So we need to set an example. As you know, Dan, one of the things I always do, and this is something I learned from Jim Timmerman, was that we read that at the beginning before the lineups are given for the girls game about, it's the responsibility to be good spectators. You have an important role in displaying good sportsmanship.
Yep.
It may, reflect your school and the community you live in. So in all areas of life, good sports are winners, and that is something that we try to remind everybody each time, because it's easy to get caught up in the game.
Yep. And
for the most part, 98% of the fans are great. They're respectful. Yeah, they might say, "Oh, come on, ref, call it both ways and whatever," and that's fine. I have no problem with that. But it's when you start getting more personal and that kind of thing. And I tell you, refs, they have a really tough job. I have gotten so, when I started doing this, I never realized how much grief those people have to take. They've got a tough job. And my hat's off to them. And, they're short of refs right now. A lot of them are getting to retirement age and they're having to fill those positions, and it's not easy. There actually is a need for more refs, and they have a tough job. They really do.
I actually booked a referee for this podcast for next year. Kurt Walderbach. Do you remember Kurt?
He's great. From Mason City. He's been doing it as long as I've been doing this, and probably before I did it.
Yep. I'm just like, I'm going to come up with a different angle for this podcast for a few episodes. So I wanted to get kind of an outside perspective of Wes Hancock.
He's a great referee. He really is.
Were there any teams, you don't have to name the teams, the towns or the school, but when you knew we were playing that team tonight, did you know there was going to be more problems than an average night? Were there some of those schools that had that reputation, or it just depend on the night and the situation?
Yeah, I think it depended on the night. I can't really think of any one particular situation or one particular school, but if I could just kind of flip the script for a second, I'd like to, and you're gonna feel good about this.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I've seen a lot of coaches, period, girls and boys. I've seen a lot of great coaches, but I think of longevity, and when you're done for a long time, you got to be doing something right. I'm just going to throw a couple names out here. You're going to recognize some of these names. Bob Hilmer, Forest City for years, and Dan Rosacker. Now, I could be wrong about this, but I think those might be the only two head coaches at Forest City in all the years I've been doing this thing for the scoreboard. Now, there may have been somebody between those two, but if there was, it wasn't for very long, because Dan Rosacker's been doing it for over 20 years. And I know Bob Hilmer did it a long time, after I started. So I'm not sure that it may just be those two. Yep. Another name is Kyle Menke.
Yep.
He's the dean of the North Iowa Conference coaches, at least for the boys. He's been doing it for like 23, 24 years. Yep. And last year, I think he took his team to the state again.
Last two, yep.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a great. And the thing about coaching, it's not just that your team is successful, that you present yourself in a way that you are a good role model. Your language is appropriate. You're not embarrassing a kid in front of the, if you're gonna talk to a kid, you can talk to him, but just don't embarrass him, and don't call him out in front of the crowd, because how's that person gonna feel? Again, we're not talking about professional athletes here. These are kids.
15-year-olds,
Yeah. But I want to tell you about two coaches in one school that I always looked forward to, and that was North Iowa. And I know that'll make you feel good. You didn't know I was going to say that, but there's two guys that they coached for years and years in North Iowa, and I just enjoyed them so much and so much respect for them. The first was Tom Smith. Yep. You know that name? He coached the girls for many, many years. And the thing I liked about Tom, always positive, patience. He would say patience, not rush things. I never saw him embarrass a kid once. He'd get on him a little bit, but never in a negative way, or as an encouraging way. And he coached for, I can't tell you how many years he coached, a long time. And I just really enjoyed his coaching. He just did a great job. Mm-hmm. And then Joe Anksman
Yep.
coached the boys. In fact, I don't know if Eric had him or if he had already retired by the time Eric played.
He had Chad Hinders as his.
Chad Hinders, and Chad Hinders was one of Joe's assistants.
Yep, for at least a couple of years, probably. Yep.
Yeah, but Joe Anksman, I don't know if you ever saw him or remember him.
Oh, yeah, I played against him. Yep.
Okay, but he had so much passion for basketball.
Oh, yeah.
It was great. He always had a smile on his face. He always encouraged his kids. He was such a outgoing guy, and it's something I'll always remember. He'd be sitting on the bench, right? And the guy, and say somebody on North Iowa would launch up a 3-pointer and go in, he would literally leap off the bench. I mean, boom, he'd be leaping off the bench and like 3-4 feet up in the air. It was great. He'd land and then he'd be cheering and then he'd sit down and then, another big shot up again. He was just so into the game. And, you just couldn't help but enjoy playing for a guy like him because he was just fun to be around, So as a scorekeeper, I just really enjoyed those guys because, he knew it was just going to be a fun environment,
Yeah. And with Tom Smith, his assistant for a long time was Dave Kakachik.
Yes.
With the mustache.
I remember him.
Dave and my dad are pretty good friends, and Dave and Tom work very well together.
Yeah, he assisted him a long time, many years.
Yep. And so Joe, I played against him all 4 of my years that I was in high school. He was the head coach, and when he really wanted to get one of his players' attention, he would take his heel and kick the back of the bleachers one time, and those kids knew to look over at him. And I have friends, from up there that said, "Oh yeah, you hear that bleacher get kicked, you look over at the bench." And one game, so I got kicked out of a game my junior year against Ventura for getting a little too physical, and so I had to sit out the next game, and that was the North Iowa game, which hurt because I loved playing against Buffalo.
Yeah.
And I think it was Joel Pauls or Jacob Maddox, maybe. They got all of my minutes that night, and one of them was camping out in the lane, and Joe kept yelling 3 seconds to the referees, and they weren't calling 3 seconds in the lane. So Joe used his heel to the bench that time a little bit differently, and he started kicking it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and it was loud. I don't know if you remember that, but
I know
from technical for that one.
but those, when we had those wooden bleachers, a kick like that, you'd really hear it. Whereas the ones now, not quite as much because they're plastic. But those wooden bleachers were loud, and sometimes a player would come and he'd either kick the bleacher or slam his fist down, and boy, you could really hear that.
Yeah, and he got
frustration and whatever. So
he got a T for that one. I remember because it was. I mean, if you couldn't hear that, you had problems.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, Ed. What was Ed's last name? The janitor with always wore the overall bibs.
Ed DeWall.
I was thinking, yep. All I could think was he probably ran to the store to get more duct tape for that set of area of the bleachers after that. Yeah.
Such good. Just, it's just so many coaches. And if I could just take a moment, Dan, I just want to recognize a few people as we talk about coaches and on my notes here. Now, again, if I left somebody out, which I could have, I apologize. So if you happen to be watching this, and I left your name out, I didn't do it maliciously, but these are the coaches I recall were I'm going to start with boys. This is at West Hancock. Now, Gene Perkins coached the boys, but he coached the boys before I started. But I want to mention Gene because there was a time when he coached the girls when I was doing the scoreboard. There's one year Bill Hudson he couldn't finish the year because he had some health issues, and Gene took over. And I remember that team went into the tournament and they won at least 2 tournament games, if not more. And they did really well. And that, to my knowledge, I don't know if he had coached girls before, maybe he had coached before, but not at West Hancock. But you think of Gene as more of a football coach, but he was very good basketball coach as well. But the first head coach I remember for the boys when I started was Kevin Rang.
Yep.
Robin Drake was his assistant, and later he became head coach. Dale Hesley was also an assistant under Kevin, and he later became a boys head coach. Brian Peterson, Jay Hiscox. Now, I may be forgetting somebody. I know it's only 5 names, and that's a lot of years we're talking about. I may be forgetting somebody for the head coaches. Now, this is not assistant, but these are the head coaches. So if I forgot somebody, I didn't mean to leave you out or anything like that.
I think you got them all, actually. That sounds right.
Girls coaches, I can't, this is what I came up with. Again, I hope I didn't forget anybody. And Bill Hudson, Lisa Hiscox, who played under Bill Hudson, and she coached, I think, a couple of years. Sari Sigurdsson. And Sari Sigurdsson, you probably not, I don't know if you know that name or not, but she was the English teacher just before Miss T came on board.
Okay.
Miss T took her place as the English teacher in 1991, but she coached basketball for a while. Of course, I mentioned Mr. Perkins. There was a gal by the name of Patty Sjostrom. Patty Sjostrom. She was, I think she was head for 1 year, and she did some assistant coaching. Beth Rasmussen, you might remember her. She still lives in Britt. She was head coach for a while. Chuck Buseman he coached for a while, girls. Robin Drake, you notice I mentioned him earlier.
You did them at the same time.
1 or 2 years, Robin Drake coached both boys and girls at the same time. I remember I asked him once, I said, isn't that a lot to do? And he says, well, I'm already here anyways. I'll just go from one practice to the next. So I think he did it for at least 1 or 2 years.
That was my sophomore and junior years.
Okay. So you remember that then. Yeah.
Because it was always Dale Hesley's job to kind of get us ready. And then as soon as the girls' game would be over, he'd come in and boom, we'd go out for the boys' game. And he had to pick between boys and girls. He's like, I can't keep doing this. And he picked boys for my senior year. And I think that was actually his last year at West Hancock. Okay. 2004, 2005.
What year was that?
0405.
0405. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And then Jim Fisher, I think he coached for 1 year at girls. And I want to say he took Mr. Buseman's place. Mr. Buseman went from social studies to guidance, I believe. And so Mr. Fisher took the social studies position, and he did coach girls for 1 year. And then Kevin Wilson, I think, was after him.
After Drake, I think.
And of course, Paul Sonius has been coaching for the last several years, and he was at Corinth Wesley prior to that. That's where I first saw Mr. Sonius, was in Corinth Wesley. When they had games at West Hancock, he was, of course, coaching there, and that's where I first was introduced to him. And by the way, Mr. Sonius has taught driver's ed for a number of years and still does it. So got a lot of experience with that. Assistant coaches, I'm just going to briefly mention some names. Again, I'm going to miss some here. Dick Evans, Robin Drake, Mark Eisman was an assistant coach for many years. Dale Hesley, of course. Kevin Eisman, he's still doing it. And there's others for the boys. Girls, Sari Sigurdsson, Roxanne Savoy was an assistant coach. Sarah Halick, Patty Sjostrom, I mentioned her name earlier. Chuck Buseman was assistant. Michelle DeHart has done some assistant coaching. Kevin Wilson, of course, has done it. Dale Hesley, and many others who I'm probably forgetting. But a lot of great coaches over the years for West Hancock, and really have appreciated all their efforts as far as that goes.
Mark was the assistant for Drake when I was a manager.
Okay.
Chad Eisman, Justin Johnson, and myself in my class were managers in like 96, 97, 98 years. I don't remember exactly what years. Mark would drive us home every night after practice. And I just remember those freezing cold nights after practice. You're all sweaty from being in that hot gym. And you get in the car and you're just shivering, freezing. Mark had this cheap little $200 car he bought, but the back seats didn't open, and neither did, I think we had to climb out a window, or at least climb through the front of the car and then climb out the window or go out the passenger side to get out of his car every night. And I remember doing that every single night after games or practices with Mark. He was a good one.
Yeah, between Mark, all that years of assistant coaching, then he had most of his kids played basketball, no girls or boys. So he spent a lot of time in the gymnasium for sure. A lot of time. So a couple other things I want to mention when I'm talking about names here. The most important person probably on the scores table is not me, but it's the person who does the book. They call it the scorebook or just the bookkeeper or whatever. And of course, I've only had 2 in 35 years. The first one, I don't know if you know this name, was Marv Ing. Marv Ing he's from Kanawha, and he was doing Kanawha high school games, before we joined together. And he came on board when we went together. And anyways, to my knowledge, he did it for about 21 years or thereabouts from the time I started. Mm-hmm. And then Miss T took over for the last 14 years. Now, there were times when Marv couldn't be there and Miss T would be the able substitute and would just pinch hit and fill it in great. They were tremendous. I mean, both of them are just tremendous and so dedicated to their work, accurate. And, when you get stuff going on so often, we got the games going on, we got subs going in and out, we got to buzz them in. We got to make sure we buzz them in at the right time. And there's just a lot of helter-skelter going around sometimes during games, especially if it's a close game, and especially if it's in the fourth quarter. So, we're all a little bit on edge and the stress levels kind of building up and then whatever, but I've had two really great people to work with because sometimes, I'm not sure if something's right and I check with them to make sure because, they will sit with the other score person next to them. So they because they want to be able to agree. I mean, that's important too.
That's the official score. Yeah.
Right. The official score. The thing I always appreciate about Marv, that was before now they have to wear a striped outfit. Miss T has to wear her striped black and white vertical striped outfit because she's the official scorer. But back when Marv was doing it, they didn't really have to do that except for tournaments. So, the thing I appreciate about him, he was so professional. He usually would wear a tie. At most games, he wore a tie, and I always felt underdressed by wearing something like this, But they were both just great, and I just have appreciated them so much. So I wanted
to. The thing with the scorekeeper, the bookkeeper, is that's a home and away job.
Right, exactly.
People are going to both.
Right, and Miss T
does
pretty right, exactly. So she does almost all the road games too, and so it's a lot of commitment, a lot of time commitment as far as that goes, definitely. So go
ahead.
I was just going to mention, and not to cut you off or anything, just a couple things I jotted down about things that have changed since I've started in '87.
Yeah.
Girls basketball at that time, of course, was 6-on-6.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed in 1993. And, that took a little time getting used to because, girls can only dribble twice. And you had 3 on the front court, 3 in the back court for each team. And so that was an adjustment. Then when they went to 5-on-5, that was so different because now you can, dribble more than twice. And the game has obviously changed a lot. So that was a big change. Game officials, for many years, it was 2.
Yep.
In fact, when you played, wasn't it still 2? Or had they gone to 3?
Yeah, it was 2, but I want to say it was right around my senior year or the year or so after is when they went to 3. I feel like we were still 2-man crew.
Okay. And
Brian Hobbs and his partner.
Oh yeah, Brian Hobbs from North. She's from Buffalo Center, right?
Yeah.
Sure, I know that name. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was just 2. Yeah.
Okay. And I mean, even with 3 now, they got a big job. There's so much things happen so much faster now, and I don't know how you keep track of it all. I mean, I don't know how 2 people can do it. And even back then, I don't know how they could even do it then. It's hard enough for 3.
I did hear though the initial first couple of years, Mark Nalen is a ref in the area. His son and I went to college together.
Okay. He
mentioned that he liked the 2-man crew better because he goes, with the 3-man crew, you rely on the other people more than you did with the 2-man crew. Mm-hmm. He goes, I was more head on a swivel on a 2-man crew than a 3-man crew. I remember him telling me that once.
Yeah. Mark Nalen has got a brother. I can't remember his name, but he usually would ref with him too.
Yeah.
I can't think of his first name, but I know what you're talking about.
It would pain me to watch Mark ref because his knees were so bad at the time.
Oh yeah, he used to limp a lot. Yeah, I remember. I remember.
I hurt watching him.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see what else I had written down. And I mentioned about how the scoreboard has changed. Now you can see the fouls and the points and all that. And as far as just within the last few years, and I'm just talking more about recently, but we've had some really successful team. The girls between 2010 and 2020, they went down to the state tournament a number of times. They got us one year, they finished runner-ups, and they had some really great teams. Boys went down multiple times between 2010 and 2020, and got third place one year. Yep. So we've had some really outstanding teams. And I guess one thing I just want to mention too, Dan, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. It's we talk about basketball being a team sport. It's really easy, to say, well, so-and-so scored 30 points, and so-and-so scored 25 points, and, they're the best players in the team. And that could very well be. But, as that basketball is more than just scoring points. Mm-hmm. Now, I remember what Michael Jordan used to say. He said he was more excited about being named the defensive player of the year than being the top scorer in the NBA for a season. His defense meant more to him than even offense.
Yeah.
And, when you think about a player, it's more than just points. It's rebounds, it's assists, who dribbles the ball up the court, who's a good passer. And, all those things make a team. And you don't have to be the top scorer to be a vital part of the team. So it's easy. Obviously, you need offense, but you also need defense. And so it makes a big difference, And so, hats off to those who score a lot of points, but it takes a team. It takes everybody, to make a team gel and to make a team successful. So, we want to remember those folks too, as far as that goes. So.
Well, I had to rebound to stay on the floor. That's for sure. If I didn't rebound, I didn't probably get as many minutes. I think that's a lost art.
You were a good rebounder too, because weren't you considered the center?
Yeah, 6 foot flat center, and had to go against all those 6'6" kids. Yeah. One thing I didn't put in our notes, but it's come across my mind here. One night that stands out to me in that gym was just a couple years ago. It still gives me shivers thinking about it, but it was either the night Coach Sanger passed away or the night after he passed away. Those games against Garrigan, when the Garrigan kids came out in those Sanger shirts.
I remember that.
Well, I wasn't there, and I heard about it after the fact. I don't think I even watched the live stream that night, but it just gives me chills, but tears me up thinking about that night. Talk about that. Holy cow.
That was pretty cool, and just great sportsmanship. And West Hancock and Garrigan, they've had their, I won't say differences, but it's quite a rivalry over the years, whether it's football or basketball. But for them to do that, that was top of the line, first class. Yeah. Really an awesome display of sportsmanship, and that I do remember that very vividly, and that was very cool, very cool. Yeah. I can remember. Do you remember the name Jim Becker?
Oh yeah, yep.
Okay, well, I'll tell you a quick story. When Jim had passed away, when I got to the game that night, they said, "Would you read this before the game starts?" I said, and it wasn't long before the game was going to start. And I quickly looked at it, and it was about Jim, having that accident. And I didn't even know it had happened.
Oh, yeah.
So I look at this, and I just went like this. I thought, I was like in shock. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to read it, but I did. But I had no clue, because I think it happened. I was either earlier that day or the day before. I hadn't even heard about it. Yeah. And then he hands me that. It wasn't more than like 20 minutes before the game starts. And oh my goodness, it's like, I was just shocked to find that out. Wow. That was just, bizarre.
That would have been tough.
Yeah. Pretty emotional for sure for the fans and everybody. So yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna wrap this up here. I do have one more sponsor to get to, and I blame my brother Eric because he didn't get me his advertisement stuff on time, so I put him at the end. One of today's sponsors is Eric Kroll with Ag Performance. Ag Performance is the leader in conventional seed throughout the Midwest. They also have a product called Xylem Plus that is fighting against fusarium, stalk rot, white mold, and other vascular diseases. Contact Eric at 515-341-3361 if you're looking for a higher return in your fields. That's Eric Kroll with Ag Performance, 515-341-3361. Thanks again to all 17 of my sponsors for sponsoring this episode tonight. Next up on the podcast, I'm doing Kevin Sanger Part 2. We're going to do some West Hancock football history. I've been doing a lot of research on that one. I'm excited for that. Then we're doing a watch along with the 2007 football team. We're going to watch the Alta game from the first round of the playoffs that year. Thanks to Alta Ward for getting that video up on YouTube for us for that. Travis Hagan, Sarah Swanson will be episode 50 for me. I'm excited to reach that milestone. And then Josh Hartman, that'll get me through most of September. And like always, I've mentioned the last couple times, I'm doing a non-sports podcast with a lot of former and still current elementary teachers, Mrs. Kitchen, Mrs. Savoy, Mrs. Hildman, Mrs. McCauley, and Mrs. Farrell. I'd like to get a lot of people lined up to sponsor that episode and give some shout outs to those teachers. So I'll be hosting that this fall to get ready for this winter. Any last minute things we want to throw out there, Mr. Padderud?
Sure.
Or shout outs?
I'm not gonna, because we've been going pretty long here. I had jotted down some memorable games I remembered, but
yeah,
they were all in the 1990s, and one of them was against, two of the three were against Garner, both in tournaments. Both I'll just do it real quick here.
Yeah.
The first one I think was in either 95 or 96. We were playing Garner and to advance to play Garrigan to go to state, and it was a low scoring game. I mean, it was like in the 30s. It was really low scoring. And I remember we scored like right near the end of the game, and we won by 2. I think Stacy Grove hit a shot with like seconds to go, and the gym just exploded like I never had heard before. And then there was the following year, 97, we were playing Garner again, and they were ranked. I mean, they had lost like maybe one game all year. I'll never forget this. I came into the gym like half hour before the game was supposed to start. There was not a single seat on that visitor side except at the scorer's table. I mean, every seat was filled. And, because everybody, Garner side was expecting, an easy win. They had beaten us twice during the season handily. Well, real quick, first half, it was dead even. It's high score. I can't remember what the numbers were. Second half, Garner could not score. They couldn't put the ball in the ocean if they were sitting on a boat. I mean, they couldn't score anything. And we ended up winning easily. And I think they scored maybe 10 points in the whole second half. They just couldn't hit a shot. And what was really a thing I always remember is how quiet that crowd was on the Garner side. It was so loud at first half, and they're right behind you, and you can hardly even think straight.
Yeah. Second
half, it was like you could hear a pin drop. I mean, it was just amazing. And then one other one was in 1997. I'll never forget this. We had a really good boys team.
Yeah.
This was the same senior class that won the football that previous fall. We had some really good players on that team, and all we had to do was win our last conference game, and we had the North Iowa Conference outright title. Yep. We were playing Northwood Kensett, and they had a guard by the name of Ricky Stotts, and he was a really good ball handler. Well, that I tell you, I don't know if I've ever seen a better game by a player, home or away, or a visitor or home team. I mean, he was just like lightning in the ball. He must have scored 35 points. He must have had 15 assists. I mean, he was everywhere. He was making great passes. Every turnovers, he was creating turnovers. And we ended up losing by like 3 points. And so we ended up tied for the conference. But what really impressed me was after the game, all our players, as they went through the line, stopped and congratulated him. We didn't hold our heads down. The team didn't hold their heads down, even though they were disappointed. Mm-hmm. And Coach Drake, same thing. He shook his hand, he looked at him, he talked with him. I thought the sportsmanship was outstanding considering how disappointing. But that kid had played an unbelievable game. And for some reason, I still remember that for all these years. And that's been, 25 years ago. So
yeah.
It's pretty amazing. But Dan, I just want to end by just thanking you for this podcast, for the invitation for me to be on this. I feel very honored to have been asked. I want to thank the school for allowing me to do the basketball all these years, and hopefully I can do it for a little bit longer. And it's just been a joy. I just really enjoy. It's just been so much fun, and I just love the atmosphere. And I just look forward to the coming year. So thank you for your podcast. Thank you for all that you're doing for West Hancock. To me, you're a true ambassador of our school and our district and our community. And I don't know how you do it with being a teacher and a parent and a a husband and all the things you got going on to be able to do all this and write your books, and you're an amazing man. So I tip my hat to you.
I appreciate it.
Great job. Great job.
It's hard not to be passionate about Britt, West Hancock. I mean, it's just such a good place to call home and to grow up. And I wanted to thank you. I put in the notes, I don't remember if you remember this, but we went to a Twins game together back in the day.
I remember that. The old Metrodome.
That was
I remember that.
And the fact that you asked me and to go to that game was a lot of fun. So
we're sitting down the left field line. I don't know if you remember that.
Yep.
And I got to tell you one quick story. Again, I'm getting winded here.
No, we're good.
It was before the game started, and we were sitting down the left field line, and I remember we were watching, some of the Twins were playing catch. Well, remember the name Johan Santana?
Yep.
He ended up going to the Mets later for big bucks and won the Cy Young. I think he won the Cy Young with the Twins, but he was playing catch, and I couldn't believe it. I don't know how far apart those guys were, and they were just throwing like frozen ropes to each other. And that just amazed me. And major league players, how they can throw a ball and just like straight as an arrow for, 150 feet or 200 feet. Like, right. I mean, I'm just amazed how they can do that. I mean, we were right on top of that. And I just was like, wow. Yeah. It's just couldn't believe it.
And then there's me, who I think I still have a West Hancock freshman baseball school record for most strikeouts in a row. And I'm not talking about as a pitcher. I'm talking about as a batter. I struck out 33 straight times or something like that.
Oh my.
Yeah. I watch those pros too, and I'm like, yeah, they're pretty good.
They always say that hitting a baseball maybe is Ted Williams said it, and I think he's right. It's the hardest thing in sports. You got two moving objects. I mean, to even touch the ball, let alone hit it where there's 8 fielders in front of you and 1 behind you. Yeah. I mean, it's like, wow.
Yeah. And incredible. How fast those pitchers throw the ball too, because we were at the Big Ten championship football game back in 2015, and there are all these fan events you can do, and they have a pitching area, and it keeps track of how fast you pitch it. And I'm with my brother-in-law and his brother-in-law, and we're all in our early 30s, late 20s at the time, and my brother-in-law goes up there and whips it as hard as he can. It goes like 51 miles an hour, and he goes, "That's it." He goes, I threw my arm out, and his brother-in-law goes, "I can beat that." He winds up and throws it like 52, and he goes, "Man, that hurt my shoulder." And I'm like, "All right, I'm going to stretch for a minute. Give me a minute." I wound up and threw it as hard as I could, and it was like 51, 52 miles an hour. Yeah. How do those guys do that in the 90s for a whole game?
Yeah, and all that stress. And you have to throw 90 or above to be in the majors. You're not going to, you can't possibly, unless you're Greg Maddux, who hits corners, and even Greg Maddux could still throw a 90 if he had to, but he just would just hit the corners all the time and get by with 87 or something. But I don't know how you do it. And then you can throw your arm out so easily. Yeah. And, it's just amazing. I don't know how they do it.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate it again, Mr. Padderud. Thanks for coming on. And like always, go Eagles.
Thank you. Bye.
Bet.